Okay, good morning everybody, and welcome to the Diversity in Geoscience UK launch event. My name's Alison Stokes. I'm one of the DIG UK co-leads along with Jackie Houghton, University of Leeds. We're going to give a more kind of concerted introduction after Nick Billam's given a short overview of how DIG UK came about. But before we do that, I'm just going to run through the housekeeping because everybody needs to know where to go to the loo and when our break times are and that sort of thing. So, if the fire alarm goes, and I don't think there's nothing scheduled today. So, if the fire alarm goes, we are on fire. So, if you're seated towards the back, if you'll make your way out of the main entrance, if you're seated towards the front, you just need to go out of this entrance to the right-hand side, and then the muster point is in the courtyard at the back of the buildings. That's right, isn't it? Yeah, in the courtyard. I think most people have probably found where the loos are, but they're basically downstairs. There's both ladies and gents. We have a quiet room if anybody wants to kind of just get away from things for a few minutes during the day, which is if you go down the stairs towards the toilets and then turn right, there's a room called the William Buckland room, which is straight in front of you, and that's booked out for the day for anybody that just wants to go and sit quietly for a few moments. Anything that I've missed in terms of housekeeping, Nick?
I don't think so, apart from the main gents' toilets are on this floor.
Oh, okay. Not being a gent, I didn't know that.
The ladies downstairs, and there's another, a single room toilet for men and women downstairs.
Okay. So facilities for all. So housekeeping over. This is the schedule for the day. I think everybody's got a handout that summarises this. I'll come back to this later on in the introduction. But the first thing that we want to do is welcome Nick Billam from the JOLSOC just to give a brief introduction and open the event formally. So if I welcome. Oh, and we are tweeting. So for the tweeters amongst you, hashtag DIG18 is what we'll be using during the day. Over to you, Nick.
Thank you very much.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome from me to the Geological Society. My name's Nick Billam. I'm Director of Policy and Communications here for about another week and a half, because sadly I'm going to be leaving the Society after about 20 years here. I'm delighted to say my successor, Alicia Newton, is here today as well. She's still in her old job, but her interest and commitment to what we're here for today has led her to come along here, which I think is a fantastic sign in terms of there being continuity in terms of our commitment here. So, Alison said I'd say a little bit about how DIG UK came to be. I think from our point of view, the whole issue of diversity, equality and inclusion in geoscience has become a real focus, particularly in the last 4 years or so. So alongside many of the other scientific societies in the UK, we signed up in October 2014 to the Science Council's Declaration on Diversity, Equality and Inclusion. And it's very easy just to sign a bit of paper and to look at these values and think, yes, we think this is an important thing, and then sign and move on. But we really decided as an organisation, our council decided at the time, this is not something just to sign up to and move on from. It's been a real focus. And I think we've come quite a way in the last few years. It certainly moved into the heart of how we think about what our purpose is. And for us, that means accessibility and inclusion in terms of how we do geoscience education at all levels. So this is obviously not just a commitment on the society's behalf, but thinking about the whole of the geoscience community. Thinking about ensuring that we have a diverse and inclusive geoscience workforce, and thinking about the transitions between those. And then also thinking about how we convey geoscience and how it matters to everyone's lives, to wider audiences, to policymakers, to members of the public, and so on. And making sure that we're really thinking about what sort of face we present to the world on that front as well. And speaking for the staff team here, I can say it's really starting to pervade everything we do and how we think about things. So a key point for us in that journey was when we were developing our new 10-year strategy that we launched last year. Diversity, equality and inclusion is right in there. It's stated as one of our values. And then when you see running through the work we do in different areas, those values are coming through in terms of planned actions. And certainly as we get into delivering our strategy through our business plan, it's there, pervading all those areas that I talked about. So on that journey, it's been really fantastic for us. We've benefited enormously from being able to work with the IAGD, the International Association for Geoscience Diversity. A key stage in that for us was a conference that we held in this room almost exactly 3 years ago, and Chris Aitchison, who's the Executive Director of IAGD, helped us very much in developing and delivering that conference, which was on accessibility, and particularly accessibility of field work for people with disabilities. We worked on that with University Geoscience UK, and Mark Anderson here, who's Chair of University Geoscience UK, is here once again. And that conference was a key stage in our relationship with the IAGD. Since then, there's been a sort of developing idea that a UK chapter of the IAGD would be a really valuable thing for our community primarily, but also it is fantastic news as far as the Geological Society is concerned, because we have this commitment and we have these values that we want to deliver on and activities that we're planning, but we don't have the expertise and the knowledge and the contacts with people who are out there already working on these sorts of initiatives. So to be able to come together with you today and launch Diversity in Geoscience UK, the UK national chapter of the IAGD, is fantastic. So for us, this is a springboard to our next few years of delivering on diversity in geoscience across the board. IAGD has had a really strong focus, particularly on disability in geoscience and all sorts of issues around that. And certainly that's a strong focus for DIG UK as well, and it's the focus of our meeting today. But I know that in due course, those involved in DIG UK are keen to see it address the full range of diversity issues and groups and characteristics. And we look forward to working with you on that. So you've heard enough from me. It's really fantastic from our point of view that we're doing this together here today. I'd like to thank Chris Aitchison very much for coming and joining us for today, and particularly to thank Alison Stokes and Jackie Houghton, who have not just, together with George Jameson, my colleague, put today together, but have been the driving force behind making DIG UK happen. I know that they're going to be on the lookout for people now to get involved in this. So I'm afraid by coming along today, you've put yourself in the firing line. You're the most likely group of willing volunteers to help get this really motoring along. So I'd encourage you to get involved with the work of DIG UK as it gets underway in the coming months and years. And have a fantastic day.
Good morning, everybody. Nick, thank you. Thank you very much for the work that you've done to get this going. It's been a long road. And George, thank you for everything you've done. I think it would be remiss to not thank Edmund Nicholas as well. He was kind of on the ground floor getting this off and running. So my name is Chris Aitchison. I am the Executive Director of the IAGD. I'm also an Associate Professor of Geoscience Education at the University of Cincinnati in Cincinnati, Ohio. The IAGD, I just want to give you a really quick history of who we are. We're in our 10th year. This formed as as kind of an advisory group in 2008 when I was working on my dissertation and realizing that there was a gap, that there was, in the traditional sense of geology and the geosciences, it's very field-oriented, and we were marginalizing a lot of people by just the traditional way that we present the science and the discipline. And so we needed an organization, not really an organization, just a group of people to come together and start to try and advise on how we could be doing things differently. So our mission has not changed since the beginning. We are primarily focused on developing this inclusive community of learning that supports students, faculty, and geoscience practitioners. Okay? Early on, it was just how are we reaching students? How are we supporting teachers to reach those students? So in the upper left-hand corner here, you see that the logo, the organization has really gone through an evolution. Early on, it was a national advisory for geoscience diversity. And it didn't take long for colleagues like Allison to question why it was just a national advisory, because this was something that was needed more than just in the States. And so that quickly changed to an international association. So like I said, in 2008, we kind of started this off, and I'm disappointed to think back and not realize that there was an actual start date, because it was kind of like a thought, right, that this thing would kick off. And I can kind of pinpoint that thought to about November of 2008. So it's not like June 4th, 2018, that we can look back on this day and realize that this is when it really kicked off. But in November of 2008, I think I was taking a walk around a park and with a really good friend of mine and talking about this idea of something that we could be doing better in the discipline. In 2013, that became more formalized. We had established a constitution and bylaws for the organization. We had elected our first executive committee in 2013. So it took 5 years to get to that point to realize that this is something that needed to happen. We had a lot of support from organizations like the National Science Foundation along the way. And in 2015, it took another step further and actually became a charitable organization in the U.S., and we established the IAGD Foundation at that point. So the original focus, though, has not changed in the sense that our goal is to create an inclusive discipline for students with disabilities. But it has evolved. It's gone from just focusing on students with disabilities and supporting teachers, instructors, and faculty on how to support them, providing them the resources and the tools necessary to work with those students in their classes. Now, let's all realize that most of us are geoscientists or scientists in general and haven't really gone through a lot of formalized educational experience or educational training. So here I am asking a scientist or a researcher to learn how to teach students with disabilities when they've really never been taught how to teach students in the first place. So you're twisting a lot of arms along the way. So this evolution has then switched from focusing on teachers and providing instructional resources to then seeing that there was a need that our faculty, our researchers, and our practitioners had disabilities as well, or were acquiring disabilities through age or throughout their careers that then jeopardized their engagement in their discipline. And so we're starting to see that a lot more faculty are coming on board and want to know more about what we do and how they can support each other. We're seeing a lot of professional societies and industry coming and saying, hey, we need some help here. And so we've been doing a lot more consulting on that. So along the way from the beginning, this is just a snapshot of some of the partners that we've established. I'm very happy, and I know Jackie and Allison are going to talk about our relationship with the Geological Society in a minute, but we're very excited to have a relationship with the Geological Society as it relates to the signing of the declaration. I think that was around 2014. So Dig UK, this is kind of the brainchild of Jackie and Allison. I'm so proud to be able to work with them. They've taken this idea and run with it, and they've checked in with me, and I'm like, take it, just take it and make something happen. And this is the this is what's happened out of it. And I'm really, really looking forward to seeing what's going, because the IAGD, as it's grown through 10 years, we've realized that a lot of things that we do are not unique to just geology and the geosciences, the earth sciences. We're starting to see a lot of the things that we do and the resources that we provide are valuable for all of the sciences. And the really interesting thing is that Dig UK is now taking that a step farther, and we're not really looking, or the Dig UK is not really looking specifically at disability. So I'm really excited to see where that evolution is going to take place. So again, thank you for hosting us. Thank you for your relationship with us. Thank you, Allison and Jackie, for everything that you're doing. And I'm very happy to see all of you here. So I hope we have a great day, and I know that we will. Thank you.
Hi, right. I'm just going to do a couple of slides on the evolution of Dig UK. I promised Alison I wouldn't call this our journey, so I won't. So it really started back in 2014, GSA in Vancouver. There was an accessible field trip run by the IAGD out there, which Alison was on. And it was at that point she was talking to Chris and going, yeah, why are you national? Why aren't you international? Hey, we could be doing stuff like this in the UK. So the idea has been floating around for a little while. As Nick said, we had the meeting at the JOLSOC here in 2015. And not long before then, I'd met Alison. Some of you may know that I've been using computer games to create what are called virtual landscapes. And we were interested in how these could make field work more inclusive. So I said, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I'll come along with that. And then Denver, 2016, again, GSA. I got myself voted on to the IAGD committee as an executive councillor. It was a vote, so I had to put forward what I intended to do to get myself elected. And I put there, we should have a UK chapter. And I thought, that'd be okay, that'll never happen. You know, I'll be fine, it'll be good. But then Chris had a talk to Nick. I wasn't around at that point, I was out at dinner. And they're both very keen. So we thought, okay, Alison and I happened to be coming down to the Geological Society for a higher education network meeting. So we had a chat with Nick and George. And the first thing we were really aiming at was the associated society status for the IAGD with the Geological Society. Now, that happened last September 2017. It took a lot of emails, backwards and forwards, myself, George in particular, Nick, Chris, we were all emailing round and round. And then quite suddenly, bam, it had happened. And I thought, excellent, I tick that off, job done. No need to worry about that. I can quietly retire now. And Nick was like, so, come on then, what are we going to do? Oh, okay, right. Okay, I'm going to have to do something now. Me and my bright ideas. I've told my husband, if I have a bright idea, to lock me in a cupboard. Don't let me out till it's passed, because there's a lot of work involved. So, yeah, we were talking with Nick, myself, Alison, George, round and round, and we'd settled a date before I could stop it happening. And it was fine. So it's been great, because I have to say it's been a push-pull. Certainly the Geological Society have pushed us along, which is great, and we've been pulling along as well. So that's how we've ended up here today. It's been very much a sort of collaboration between us all. So, again, I promised Alison I wouldn't use the lingo, so I'm not going to unpack diversity in geoscience in UK as to what it means. But just to give an idea, Chris has already said we're going to look beyond disability. This actually comes a little bit into the last point about the UK being different. We're a much smaller country than the US. We're about a fifth of the size. I realise I'm skipping ahead here. We do have a different culture, but very particularly we do have a different education system, which actually means we see fewer students with disabilities coming into the geosciences because they have to make the decision very early on as to what they're going to study. Right back 13, 14 when they're choosing their GCSEs, what routes are they going to take through, and it's quite easy to be put off studying one of the geosciences. Whereas in the States, I think geoscience can be seen as an easy option to tick off your science course that you have to take as part of your degree. And so they have a much more of a variety of students with disabilities that need to be catered for. And everybody said to us, well, disability, that's great, but what about everything else? And we were like, yeah, that's fine. I have no problem with that. Alison's been looking at the attainment gaps with relations to students, from BAME, socio-economic, as well as perhaps the more obvious sort of aspects of diversity around sexuality, gender, sexual identity, all that sort of thing. So we were like, yeah, it's fine. We're quite happy to be diverse in our diversity. The geoscience, I frequently say to people, it's not just geology. We're using geoscience in the American sense. It's everything, astronomy, archaeology, all the way through. We've got ecology, environment, geography, geese subjects, and beyond. I think it's any sort of study of the Earth or Earth systems. What tends to unite us is fieldwork, because with fieldwork, that brings inclusivity into focus. How are we going to enable students to come on fieldwork, enable students to show us, their best efforts on fieldwork when they may be dealing with many other issues. A particular one we'll be dealing with today is mental health, which is something that I think affects nearly everybody, and again, can hit us in the face when we're on fieldwork. Actually, at Leeds, the Faculty of Environment we're the good guys because we're talking about diversity and equality and inclusion. And I've said to people, it's because we have to deal with it in the field. We don't just have a lecture hall of 400 students that march in and march out and we barely interact with. We're with students in the field. We may be 2 or 3 hours from the nearest help. We need to know, we need to be able to help these students deal. And the staff, I should say we are beyond just the students, the staff as well. There's an interesting paper out on staff mental health on field trips as well. So it's geoscience, it's diversity and beyond, and geoscience and beyond. And I've already said it's UK. We hope maybe to act as a template for other IAGD chapters in other countries as well as we move on. So I think that's all I have. So I'm over to Alison now.
So one of the questions that I asked people in the application form was, what do you want to get from attending this event? Because although a small number of people have driven the development of Dig UK, actually we don't own it. The community needs to own it. And so a really important feature of the launch event needed to be, what does the community want from this? What do people want to gain from attending the event today? So sorry about the really teeny tiny print up there, but the options were networking opportunities, to share practice and experience, to hear about others' practice and experience, to learn more about supporting students with disabilities, and opportunities to get involved. And really, the majority of people were up for all the interactive stuff, the networking, the talking to other people, finding out what other people do. So rather than put together a day that involved just sitting passively listening to lots of people talk one after the other, we've put together a schedule that really emphasises people talking to other people and finding out what other people do, what their experiences are, what their ideas are for the future, what we need to be doing with Dig UK. So the whole of the day is really built around interaction. The first session that we have will be led by Cedric John from Imperial College, and that's going to focus on mental health because of all the issues that academics are talking about in relation to disability. Mental health seems to be the most frequent and the one that people are attributing the most importance to. So we were really keen to have a session that focused on mental health. And when we were putting the day together, I did a very quick search on Google. I just put in Mental Health Geosciences UK, and top of the list was Cedric and his team. And I thought, well, that seems to be the best thing to go for. And luckily, Cedric was very open and happy to come and deliver a session for us today. So we'll be having a session on mental health, which will lead us up to lunch. After lunch, we have an open session. So I invited people to indicate whether they wanted to informally share their practice in some way. And we have a range of volunteers who have volunteered to present aspects of their practice or experience in a way that's going to hopefully start conversations. So we have people with posters, we've got people with some interactive kit, we've got people that are going to start roundtable discussions. So this session after lunch is very much about finding out what other people are doing. And if in that session it ends up that people just go off in a corner and have their own conversation, that's fine. If you're talking about something that interests you and it's to do with diversity, then that's great. But the whole point of that session is really for people to get to know each other a little bit better. And then the final interactive session of the day is around leadership and advocacy. Because if what we have here today is the beginning of the Dig UK community, then we need to work out how best we're going to lead this into the future. So Chris is going to be doing a, I gather, very interactive session around leadership and advocacy, particularly for students with disabilities, but also, I hope, touching on broader aspects of diversity as well. At the end of the day, we'll bring this all together and kind of reflect on what we've talked about, what's happened, and really where we need to go next. Because as I said, this isn't for Jackie and Chris and I to decide what happens next, because we don't own it. This is for everybody as a collective to decide what do our priorities need to be, what should we be focusing on, how are we going to make this happen. And then we're going to drink wine. Ideal. So that's going to be how the day will progress. And just some things for people to think about over the course of the day. And I believe, Chris, am I right, that there are there some flip chart papers with various questions written on for people to stick post-its on during the day if you have any ideas. But just some things for people to think about. How can Dig UK support and promote diversity and inclusion in UK geoscience? And as Jackie said, that's geoscience in its very broadest sense. What should we focus on in the short, medium and longer term? How are we going to achieve that? How would people like to be involved? So should we be looking at, for example, setting up special interest groups, or is there another model we can use? What elements of training about diversity should be done at institution level? What could we do at national level, maybe through the Dig UK network? And let's be honest, we have no money. How are we going to fund all of this? If we're going to make this happen, we need to get some financial support in order to do that. So what are the potential sources of support that we can tap into? So people can kind of have those ideas ticking away in their heads during the day, and then we'll come back to some of these in the plenary at the end. That will be great. So any questions or any comments before I hand over to Cedric for our first session? Okay. So, without further ado, I would like to warmly welcome Cedric John from Imperial College, who's Senior Lecturer in Geology, but also, most importantly, the Chair of their Mental Health Awareness Team. And there we go, Cedric.
Are you sure it's my turn now?
I'm absolutely sure it's your turn, yes.
All right, thank you.
It's worth waiting for.
All right, well, thank you very much. Thank you for having me. It's really an honor to be invited to this meeting and to be able to talk a little bit about mental health, which is something that I'm passionate about and that we're trying to tackle at many levels at Imperial College and everywhere, I think, in the society. Now, I think your slides were very interesting because I noticed that 90% of us are interested in hearing the experience of others, but only 40% of us are interested in sharing our experiences. So that's not going to work. I think we're here. It needs to be an interactive session. We need to share our experience or lack of experience even, and then we can have a discussion. All right, so the plan for this interactive session, I'll tell you a little bit about me. Some of you know me, some of you don't know me. And then I have some slides to give you an introduction to the topic of mental health. Some of you might know a lot about mental health, some of you may not know much about mental health, so this is kind of an introduction. And then I thought about two topics, but this is completely up for grabs, but I thought maybe two broad area of discussion could be talking about how we tackle mental health in geosciences in a department environment, so when we are, in the department. But also, we heard a lot about mental health and physical health in the field, and I think this is a completely different kind of worm. Talk about field work. What do we do about mental health when we're away from our infrastructure? Perhaps very far away from our infrastructure for mental health. So hopefully that will make sense. Please feel free to interrupt me, ask questions anytime. I don't want this to be a formal talk. I have a few slides, then we have time for discussion, but I'm happy to just take it as it goes. So who am I? I thought it'd be a bit useful to introduce myself. Well, I'm a senior lecturer at Imperial College. I teach stratigraphy and carbonate reservoirs. And my research is actually, usually when I stand on this podium, is to talk about carbonates, geochemistry, machine learning, numerical methods, so something completely different. The reason I'm introducing myself this way is just, again, to make a point I think that Chris made, that I am not a mental health worker. I'm not a psychologist. I don't have this background and training that takes 10 years to achieve. So like all of us, or most of us around here, I'm trying to make do with a geoscience background, okay? I do, however, represent, I'm the mental health champion from my department, and I'll talk a little bit about what this is, what we've done, and what are the challenges that we face. And I also represent mental health as my expertise on our Imperial College EDI, so Equality, Diversity, and Inclusion Forum, because we have at Imperial, it's a new venture or a new movement. We have an EDI forum, and so I represent here mental health as well. So as you can see, you don't need to have a lot of mental health expertise to be invited as the leading geoscientist on mental health, and this is kind of representative of the state, I think, of mental health in general. So let's talk a little bit about mental health, and the first point to make really is that it is a very prevalent problem. It's a very widespread problem. If you look at statistics from the World Health Organization, 1 in 4 persons will be affected by a mental or neurological disorder at some points in their life. Okay, this is something that is very, very common. It's not necessarily permanent, but it's absolutely normal and expected. All right, so it's a big issue. So I'd like to make a difference between physical health and mental health. And if you do some Google, right, most of what I'm going to present, by the way, is from Google. It's not my own research. But if you do some Google search, here's what you find for how to deal with a broken arm. There's actually a WikiHow to have fun when you have a broken arm, right? They give you little tricks of what you can do. And look at that guy. He has a broken arm, but he's very smiley, very happy, handsome looking. Okay, so physical health, everybody understands this. You break an arm, all right, okay, well, that sucks, but you're going to get better. If you do a search for broken mind, what you get is much more dark and much less, positive. There is a stigma associated with mental health. Even though we have 1 person out of 4 who eventually, at one point in their life, will experience some poor mental health, because mental health is on the spectrum, the way we perceive it is much more negative. It's much more about who you are if you have a mental health issue rather than what happens to you at this particular moment. And that's a big problem. And I would venture that in academia, this is even more of a problem. Why? Because we pride ourselves on our ability to think. This is what we do, isn't it? This is thinking, learning. And so if you have a mental health problem, or if you feel low, or if you feel you're not up to the task, then it's even more of an issue internally and maybe externally. So let's look at a few slides on the population in an academic environment and how they perceive mental health and the stigma associated with mental health. And this, I give credit here to the Priory Group who puts this information online. If you look at students in the UK, now we're talking undergrad students, 7 in 10 students find it hard to believe one of their peers when they say they have a mental health issue. What does that mean? That means that if a student says, I really can't do this assignment because I'm depressed, most people around them, most of the undergrad students, so 70% will say, yeah, well, he doesn't have or she doesn't have a mental health issue. It's just they were too lazy to do it, and they use this as an excuse. So there is a big difference or a big disconnect between the known prevalence of mental health issue and the ability of people to actually believe it or to perceive it as being real. That number is actually higher in a place like London. Okay, I don't know why. Maybe it's because it's more competitive. Maybe. I have no idea. But if you look at the statistics for London or major cities, it's 8 in 10 students who find it unbelievable, that won't believe the students. Maybe more worrying is that 60% of students, or 6 out of 10, have reported, this is a survey that was done by the Priory Group, have reported that they have seen one of their peers being essentially stigmatized after admitting that they had a mental health breakdown. Okay, so there's still, to this day, a very big stigma associated with mental health, certainly amongst the undergrad population or in the UK. And I think, to be honest, I think it's something that is everywhere in the society, not just in academia. It's something that we start to tackle in academia as in the society, but it's still very much here. And again, not every region is impacted the same way. I mean, it's prevalent everywhere, but as you can see, in London, it's much higher. Okay, so the 5 areas that are least likely to believe another student has mental health issue in London, 80% are least likely to believe that the student who opens up and says, "Yes, I'm not feeling well," is actually not feeling well. West Midlands comes second. Ireland and the South East and Scotland come also in the top 5. Okay, so not everywhere is the same. So that's maybe one of the things you said was, what needs to be national, what needs to be local. I will advocate that certainly a lot of it needs to be local, and I'll talk about this in a minute. And 90% of the students, however, feel that the university, so us, could do a better job at tackling mental health. Okay, so there is a big demand from our students, our undergrad students, for more mental health support. So that gives you kind of an idea, an introduction of where we stand. So let's look a little bit across the pond in the US, and we'll look at some statistics that are also found online on undergrad students in college in the US. And you can see that there, outside of the UK, the problem is similar in terms of magnitude. Okay, so about 1 in 3 students reported a prolonged period of depression. So really a prolonged period of depression where essentially they could not function well. 30% reported that this problem was associated with school or the inability to work. We'll see in a minute that this is a big issue. It's the workload. It's the demand put on the students by their peers, by themselves, by their parents, by society, and that's a big stressors, okay? And 50%, half of the students rated their mental health below average or poor, okay, during their studies. So half of the student population in this survey in the US basically reported that their mental health was poor. And interestingly, about half of them as well received no mental health education or awareness before joining university. And I can speak for myself. I had no mental health training awareness whatsoever until, I was a lecturer looking into it. Okay, so that's something, the educational system does not necessarily prepare you very well to the awareness of, mental health. Physical health it's visible mental health. It's not visible, it's stigmatized, so it's even less visible. So that's a big issue. What I also find fascinating is that only 7% of the parents of those 50% of the students, that reported that they had mental health issue, only 7% actually thought that they had mental health issues. So what it tells me is that the student would not even open up to their own parents. Okay, it's really something that you bottle up, and that's a big issue here, a big problem. So what are the worries, the main worries from the undergrad population? Another survey in the US, well, anxiety, more than 50% of the students reported anxiety. They could tick more than one box. That's why if you add these things up, it comes to more than 100%. Depression was surprisingly high, okay? Now, the clinical definition of depression is, feeling low, in a low mood for a prolonged period of time. What that prolonged period of time is can vary. But I'm not sure that it's technically really the students judging themselves if they were really depressed, but certainly they felt low. Stress, maybe unsurprisingly, 40% of the students are stressed. Family issues, it's still 1/3 of the students have family issues, and at the undergrad level, they leave their family usually, they come and study at university. That's a major change, and we'll talk about how these things can impact your mental health. Academic performance, of course, worrying about doing well, worrying about being able to cope with the demand of the job, and some relationship problems as well. So interpersonal relation, either very, very broadly defined. So it could be with your supervisors, it could be with your teachers, but it could also be a personal relationships. That leads, unfortunately, to very concerning statistics. And I'm sure everybody in this room, if you are from the UK, you are aware that the rate of suicide in our undergrad population is rising. And the reason you're aware of it is because it makes national news, front page. And I did not find statistics up to 2018, but if you look from 2015 to 2005, so 10 years of statistics, the number of undergraduate suicide in the UK, you can see that it's actually increasing by an alarming rate. Okay, we're at 150 cases, or more than 150 cases in 2015. And all of this is basically linked together. This is really the wake-up call, I think, for most university is this statistics, because it's unacceptable. So something has to be done. And this is, frankly, probably the reason I'm standing in front of you today, is because Imperial College, amongst other schools, realized this problem. We're not immune to things like this, and we're trying to tackle the problem and do something about it. So let's broaden this problem. Let's broaden the mental health problem, and let's look at what effectively causes you to have poor mental health. And generally speaking, you have things in your life that can increase your stress level and push you from a healthy mental health state to a poor mental health state. And some of these, you will see, are very general, and some of those, however, I think resonate heavily in an academic context. So in terms of stressors that can push you to have poor mental health are general ones like being a carer for someone, moving houses, divorce, so life-changing experiences. The general population goes through this. But there's also a occupational burnout. So essentially being unhappy with your job, defined in a broad context. So for instance, the fear of failure, which I think is a very big one for academic, feeling that you're a fraud. I mean, how many of us, I'll raise my hand, has thought at some point in their career, what am I doing here? I'm probably not good enough for that job. That's something that is very common, and is common from professors all the way down to our undergrad students. The feel that, okay, we're at the top, we need to perform, we need to be really sharp, and it's a very, very competitive world. We need to be up there. So that's a big, big stressor. Other general problems also can be, for instance, financial problems. If you're an undergrad student working, or a grad student or a postdoc, uncertainty about your future, all of these are big, big, big stressors. So if you combine all of them, the academic world essentially has high demands, low financial rewards, you know, and you essentially have to deal with these things. Plus, of course, you're still a human, so you still have relationship problems, you still have problems maybe with your parents, you still move houses, you know, and you might go divorce, life changes. So you put all of them together, and you can see that in academia, it's not surprising that we have a high rate of poor mental health. And it's something that we're starting to basically realize and tackle. So I talked a lot about undergrad students. Now let's talk a little bit about us, or PhD student and up. And there's this cartoon from PhD Comics where this PhD student is trying to make a list of good year resolution for grad school that includes eat better, sleep more, get more exercise, see friends. All of these, by the way, great tips if you want to have a good mental health, okay? Or graduate, okay? That's often the problem, is putting everything aside because you have to focus on doing 12, 15, 18 hours a day. I've seen that happen. I had to tell some of my PhD students to take a break, go on holiday, take a weekend. And it's something that is really a culture shift, I think, in academia. It's going from a push to, okay, you need to balance things. You know, yes, you have to be there. Yes, you have to work hard. But you don't want to kill yourself doing this. You have to have also balance in your life. And it's something that we need to realize as a society, and I think as academic, maybe we need to lead this. So there are numbers to show that PhD students are also a category that is at risk of poor mental health. And in fact, there's a paper published last year that looked at a PhD student at the University of Ghent in Belgium. And they reveal that 1/3 of them are at risk of developing a common psychiatric disorder. And that's not so surprising. Most of us, I guess, have been through a PhD. It's a tough experience. And depending on who your support network is, and by this I include your supervisor, your peers, etc., it can be made easier or tougher. And that's a population then that's also at risk, not just our own undergrad students. Now, obviously, the paper states that it's based on a small number of PhD students. Ghent is not a major university, and it's only one university. But they do highlight that these trends are actually common to academia. So they can be seen in different parts of academia. So is the problem in academia that we stop being valued as an individual and be valued more for our brain? Another one of my favorite PhD comics here, where this is how a PhD student sees themselves as a complex human being with feelings and all sort of things. This is how essentially us, supervisors, see them, a stick and a brain, okay? And just push and get more results out. So I think, again, my case here is to say that the academia is a culture where excellence in everything is demanded of us. And it's certainly true also for us, for the professors, for the readers, the lecturers. We have to be excellent. At Imperial, we have to be excellent at everything. We have to be excellent at teaching, excellent at research, excellent at bringing funds, and excellent at doing admin. So, there's no excuse for not being good, right? And that puts a lot of pressure on us and pressure on the students. So that's a big factor of stress. And add to this financial stress, which is also another big factor. And here, for about 5 years, I was the postdoc champion before I became the mental health champion. And I think the financial stress and the uncertainty about the future is something that impacts our postdoc especially. Because, you come out of a PhD, okay, you've done it, you got your PhD. And what are you told? Do you know what? That was just not enough. Now, good luck. Maybe 5% of you will go to this elated position of academic role. So there is here also a lot of frustration from the postdoc population. And one message, by the way, that we're trying to convey at Imperial is, look, it's only a small percentage that goes to academia, but frankly, there is a whole world out there of really good jobs that are, as fulfilling and probably sometimes more fulfilling than an academic position. So it's also managing expectation is important. So the risk, I think, is to dehumanize academia and to focus more and more on productivity and less on inclusivity and on essentially being, a good member of the community that a department is. It's probably not unique to academia. It's probably something a trend we've seen in society in general. but it's, I think, something that leads to poor mental health. So far, no questions? Okay. So let's talk a little bit about psychology, and this is Maslow's Pyramid of Needs, which is a big classic for psychologists. So the pyramid is organized in such a way that it shows what is important to an individual to have good mental health and essentially be happy, if you want to define it this way. At the very base, of course, is what's more important, is what essentially, if you don't have it, there's no way you're going to be happy. And you can see that these are physiological needs. We need food, water, warmth, and rest. Without these physiological needs being met, there's no good mental health. Okay, so you need to have those. And on top of this is safety. Okay, the security, the safety. If you have food, water, but you're in a war zone, you're unlikely to also feel well and have a good mental health. Okay, so safety. Then belonging and love needs. So essentially having intimate relationships, friends, a community. Okay, that really is also important. And then we go higher in the pyramid tier, and we're going to esteem. So the prestige and feeling of accomplishment. Now we're starting to talk about something that matters or is recognizable in academia. The need to be essentially esteemed. So if you're an undergrad student, that means doing well at your exam, getting that first-class degree, for instance, right? If you're a professor, it's getting your paper in Nature, or so all of this. And then we have the self-fulfillment needs, which is essentially achieving one's full potential. Is at the very top of the pyramid. When we think about our students, PhD students, undergrad students, or people working with us, we think of them here. We want them to be at the top. We want them to be the best. We want them to fulfill their maximum potential. The only way they can do this is if all of this is done. You cannot get to the top of the pyramid if you're missing a layer. Okay, that's very important. So let's keep that thought in mind, because what I'll try to show you now is the relationship between mental health and inclusion. So let's talk about equality, diversity, and inclusion, and its psychological impact. So what happens if you are excluded? Now, this is a very broad definition of exclusion. You can be excluded because of gender. You can be excluded because of sexual orientation, because of ethnicity. But you can also be excluded because you're a student from Indonesia and you come to the UK and you know nobody. Okay, so it's a kind of a fuzzy exclusion. It can be an exclusion that is societal, but it can also be an exclusion that is just due to the fact that, let's face it, we're an international organization and people come with very, very different expectation or support network to study or to work at any level of the organization. I'm sure you can hear in my accent that I was one of the red guys at some point, coming to the UK 10 years ago. So the problem is, if you look at where belongingness features, so the feeling of belonging to a community, it's actually in the middle of the pyramid. It's really fundamental to your good mental health. So if you work with anything away today, work with this. If you have a student or someone who is not integrated into the department or integrated into the society or for any reason feels excluded and doesn't have a support network, they're unlikely to have good mental health. They need to have a feeling that they belong, that they're supported. Okay, whatever that feeling may be. I do have students coming from all around the world. Usually they find a society of students from the same area and they have meetings and they create a support network. But if you're excluded, then the likelihood of you not being able to function or to feel that your mental health is poor is very high. And okay, this is a statistics from Touchstone, so I don't want to make too much of it. That could be contentious, but it shows access to mental health in the UK by ethnicity. All right, and you can see white British figure right there. Okay, so just under 4%. This is 2013-2014, so for 1 year. So again, this is access to mental health. It's not reported mental health issues or having mental health issues. It's who accessed it. white others, so non-British, is actually higher than white British. So same ethnicity if you want, but different cultural background. Already we see more access to mental health. Asian, British Asian, is about the same or slightly lower. Black and Black British is higher, and other ethnicities, so everything lumped together, is higher, but who knows what is in this category. So like I said, I don't want to make too much of those numbers, but I think it's fair to say we're not necessarily equal in front of mental health. And if you have a larger mental support, you're more likely to be, network or social support, you're more likely to feel comfortable and have less needs for access to mental health. Now, I have to disclose, I'm not a psychologist. My partner, however, is a psychologist. She's also a Muslim American. And she gave me the example when we talked about this slide. She said, in her case, when 9/11 happened, she grew up in the US, she's as American as can be. But when 9/11 happened, all of a sudden, she found herself, her parents are from Pakistan, so she clearly looks, as a non-white American. And she suddenly found herself very isolated, Someone give you a bad look in the street. You start to think, what is it? What happens? Okay. And that actually is a big stressor. So you can imagine if you stick out in any way, this will really impact your well-being and your feeling of being included. And there's actually, unfortunately, a loop that you can very well imagine. Imagine that you start by feeling as not belonging, so not being included. That leads actually to you isolating yourself from the society, from the department, from your peers, from your research group. You don't want to expose yourself to something that is uncomfortable to you. So you're more isolated, and isolation leads to poor mental health. So you get poor mental health, which means you're more likely to actually be further isolated or even excluded because, he's a bit weird, isn't he? So there's a loop here where if you're not belonging, it could lead to poor mental health and to even more isolation. And that's something that needs to be broken in order to get away from this loop. And I think this is where we as a university or a department have a role to play, right? So if you look, this is from NHS Scotland. It shows the areas of influence for mental health. And it breaks this into the individual, so the person, the community, so the community around the individual, and the society at large. So as a university, we have, a little bit of, we can influence society, of course, but this is kind of a long-term project, and we're not the main movers. But you can view the university as a community, and this is very true for our undergraduate students, especially if they stay and they leave their parents and come and live with some of their peers. And essentially, the university for the next 4 years is their community, their closest community. It's true for our postgrad students, and it's true also very largely for staff. Certainly, international staff. Most of my friends in support network are other geoscience or other university lecturers in the country or abroad. And this is where the community has to work on providing safety and social support, inclusions, and making sure that the individual is valued and participates to the community and gets something from the community. So that's the level at which we can really make a big difference. So the two open discussion themes that I had, like I already mentioned, is what are the best practices to overcome mental health challenges within our departments or within our companies, if you're working for a company, and what do you do if you have students or staff with mental health issue that pop up when you're far away and on field work. And I lead field trips in Oman, so we are pretty far away, and in a country that doesn't speak very well English, so it's not like we have an easy access to NHS or any support easily. So these are kind of like maybe the two themes we could discuss. Is everybody okay with that? All right. And I'll start maybe with the first theme by presenting a little bit of the challenge at Imperial. And I really would welcome some feedback if the challenge, to know if the challenge is the same in other departments or different, or, you know, and how you tackled it. So I'll show you a little bit what the challenge is and how in my department we try to tackle it. Yes?
How did, you might be going on to say this, but how did you actually develop a role that you have in the Earth Sciences Department? Because I'm really impressed that you exist.
Yeah.
And why doesn't that happen across all?
Yeah. So I will talk about this. It's a very good point. I can talk about how it came into being. But essentially, I'll tell you what, it's a discussion that evolved between Mark Sefton and myself, so the current head of department, and he asked me to take on that role, and I essentially had, you know, no mandate. I could do whatever I wanted, and I needed to come up with something. And I'll maybe in the next few slides, I'll show you what I've done. Okay, and that comes back to Alison. I think it was you mentioning, you know, the local versus the national requirements, and that I'll argue here. A lot of it is actually very, very local, and it's your community, your department, what you do. Yeah. Okay. So, what are the challenges that, let's say, I faced when I started this role? Well, the first thing is, actually, it's not like the university didn't have anything about mental health. There was a lot available on mental health, but the information was very dispersed. It was very difficult to find, okay? One of the issues and one of the reasons the information was so dispersed is because, as far as the university is concerned, we're not equals. We have staff, we're a member of staff, we have benefits, and we have students. Students are not staff. So if you're a postdoc and above, you go in one direction, but if you're a PhD student and below, you know, you have access to different support system. And this is not transparent when you search online or Google or look at the Imperial College website. So that was one issue. The other thing, I couldn't resist putting this from the McGill Tribune, is that there's a very long wait time for NHS, so access to proper mental health is very long. There are limited resources internally at the university, yet we have a growing demand for mental health services at Imperial College. Okay, and here's the skeleton saying in the McGill mental health waiting room, it's okay, I was dead inside to begin with, okay? But it illustrates also that this problem that I am facing or that our students are facing also exists in Canada. It's not unique necessarily to the UK or to London. It's a big issue, access to mental health. And it's a resource problem. Essentially, it comes down to money, again, finding the funds. And another problem, of course, the stigma that surrounds mental health. And that's one of the major barriers to overcoming this problem. And I do think that there is something that makes this problem even more prevalent in the UK, where people are maybe less likely or less used to opening up and talking. You know, it's more like a stiff upper lip kind of mentality. You know, you bottle it up, especially men. And that's what drives, if you looked at statistics on suicide in the UK, men have a higher tendency of committing suicide, and it's attributed often to the fact that they also have a lesser willingness to open up about their problems to peers or to others, whereas women maybe are more likely to admit kind of, you know, maybe not feeling well or having some issues. So speaking about your problem and not feeling stigmatized is really a key here. It's one of the main things, and if it's something that, you know, that we can do, then we need to do it. So there were things on that list that I had very little control on. You know, my ego is not such that I think I can really solve this one, right? And like, I can't really force the university, arm wrestling them to put 10 million to mental health, okay? At least not on the short run. This is something that I do think it needs to change. I do also think that it needs to change in the society in general, but it will be a slow process. However, there are things that we have really full control on as individual lecturers or if you have a role in your department. And one of them is talking about mental health, to destigmatize it. The other one is the challenge of the fact that the information about mental health is dispersed and not easily accessible. So the first thing I realized is this is not a one-man's job. This is a team's job. Mental health is a team's job. And one thing that Imperial College has put in place is the mental health first aider system. It's an Australian course on mental health first aid that basically teach you. It's a 2-day course that teach you essentially how to handle someone who is in a crisis about mental health. It teaches you a little bit about the different types of mental health issues that you can encounter, about what mental health is. It also teaches you to listen in a non-judgmental way, to not respond or react either in your body expression, your body language, or verbally to things that can be said that can be very hard, and hard to hear. So try to be essentially compassionate, non-judgmental, and tackle the issue brought up by the individual that approached you. So there's this mental health first aiders course available at Imperial College, and what I did is I built a team that I tried to have as diverse as possible, and by the term diverse today, I guess, is very, you have to be careful about it. But yes, we try to be as diverse as possible in terms of gender, racial background, but also whether you were, a early career, late career, or maybe even not, maybe just staff or student. So we try to build this team that I call the Mental Health Awareness Team. This is an awful slide, I realize this, but it's nevertheless, we'll go through it. It's one that shows you a little bit about what I have done really at Imperial, what is it that we've done in the department, and why I believe that whatever solution you come up with has to be tailored to your environment, even to your department. So here's where I sit. So I'm essentially the chair of this mental health awareness team, but I am also the mental health champion for the department. So these are two distinct roles. One is to essentially coordinate internally mental health and mental health awareness and things like this. The mental health champion is actually something that the university is championing. And so essentially then I interact with the faculty and with the university in my role of mental health champion. This is where I sit what my hat is when I sit at the EDI forum, for instance, is as the EC mental health champion. And my main goal was to not reinvent the wheel, okay? And to not try to do it all myself. It's impossible. We had a lot of really good things happening in the department. What we needed was more clarity and was better coordination and also communication between the different sectors of the department. So here's an example. The undergrad students, where are we? There we go. This is all PhD, sorry. Yes, the undergrad students traditionally have had very strong support. Why? Well, in part because we had an absolutely amazing administrator at the undergrad level, okay, who did a cracking job at essentially taking care of the students from the day they came in all the way to the day they graduated. So we had locally someone and a team of multiple persons who took care of the undergrad students, who took care of them in terms of a tutoring role, which really is 90% of mental health, really. Is reassuring and saying, okay, we'll take whatever. Most of the things that happen at the undergrad are really student panicking and coming and saying, well, I did not feel well, I had anxiety, I did not do well at my exam, and the main thing to say, or that this undergrad team has to say is, don't worry, we'll take this into account when we look at mitigating circumstances. And just the fact that we have a mitigating circumstance panel at the undergrad already takes the stress down, which allows the student to function well. So traditionally we had a very good team. Also, these students in the UK come essentially from being children to university where they're considered adult. So it's a major change, and everybody realized this. You know, I have teenage kids. It's kind of scary as a parent, but everybody realized that, you know, you take these kids used to a very structured life at school and you bombard them out of their home, away from their parents, into the university. It's going to not go smoothly in some cases. Okay, so there was a support network there. If you go higher into the master's level or the PhD level, that's where things were not so good, let's put it this way, where there was not that level of support. And the PhD students, I think, and the postdoc level especially. Why? Because we have about 150 PhD students in the department, so we're a big department, it's a lot of students. However, they're not organized into one cohort and, you know, a very well-organized group. There is an infrastructure there, but they depend also very, very largely on their individual supervisors. Okay, so your individual supervisor will have a lot of sway on how your life goes. So what I did is I tried to get people to help me and build this mental health awareness team, and we divided our efforts into different sectors, and we divided these to basically match what already existed, but offer a forum in which we could talk and bring together and cross-seed the experience from, for instance, the undergraduate senior tutors to the MSc student tutor, all the way to the PhD student team, okay? And then, of course, into the staff, which includes postdoc in the department. So the idea is to use whatever you have in place, but promote a discussion on mental health. So at first, what we did is we met about every 2 weeks, because we had to kickstart this. We had to build it from the ground up. And I'll show you a few slides about this, but essentially we try to work on, you know, signposting resources and making sure that everybody, if they shall need someone to talk to, can easily find not one person but multiple persons. Okay, you're not comfortable talking to me, that's fine. You can go talk to this person. I don't need to know why you don't want to talk to me. Just go talk to this person. Okay, and then the other side, of course. So there's a big part of the job is coordination. The other side is also coordination with the head of department and with the university to see what they are doing and what they are offering at every level, but also feedback our experience and maybe inform their policies, their decisions, and basically be a member of this wider community that the university represents. So signposting. The web is amazing, but you have to use it well. And so what we did is we just created a web page, a local web page for the department that anybody can access from within the department, where you can find information about who is a mental health first aider, a trained first aider, about who you can go to if you want some support for mental health. If you're an undergrad student, just to give you an example, you're better off going to the undergrad tutors. You don't have to, but it's highly recommended because they're here, they're trained, they're here for you, and it will automatically go into the mitigating circumstances that you might benefit from. So there are some benefits. You're not forced to do this, but we try to highlight those very clearly. We also highlight resources at the university level and resources outside of the university. So the Chaplaincy, for instance, but also NHS, where there is a wide range of mental health facilities, but you need to be able to access them. You need to be able to know what you should do, etc. So it's training, and it's also signposting. Those are the main things. And it's breaking the stigma. I love this cartoon. It's from Simi, Scotland. It's okay to not be okay. I'm not okay, that's okay, all right? This is really where we need to be at. And I think, honestly, that within the department, there are very, very encouraging signs. We need to break the stigma. We need to allow people to talk if they feel like they want to talk and not be stigmatized. So what can we do about this? Well, talk about mental health. Communicate about mental health. Make it clear that this is really normal. Just like you get sick, you also have times when you have poor mental health. Don't hesitate to give your own examples. I open up. I talk about my difficulties, for instance. Just don't, lead by example. Show that you're human too. That it's not, just this amazing, superhero of a supervisor or a professor, or, you have to also show that you have a softer side and that this is something normal. Share personal experience. And always, if someone comes to you with some issues about mental health, try to not be judgmental. Try to listen non-judgmentally. One thing I maybe have not stressed enough is we're not psychologists. We're not here to give counseling. It's not our job. We could do a butchered job at it as well. Okay, this is a career. This is a professional activity. So that is not our role. Our role is to take the person in the crisis and sit them down and say, okay, look, what is going on? Right. Well, here are your options. If you think it's something that needs, for instance, counseling, you advise them, right, go to NHS with your GP, register. It's going to take 2 months, but eventually you'll get access to some mental health services, or talk to charities, or you know what, I'm going to give a call to the counseling services at Imperial because you're an undergrad student or you're a PhD student, you need to see them. Or if you're a staff, we actually have better facilities. You can just call this number and they will help you. Okay, so we signpost and we make sure that the person is then encouraged to go to the next level. Whether they take your advice or not is their choice, but we follow up on them and make sure that everything is okay with them. And we can organize or help organize mental health focused activities, such as giving some information about mental health. This is what I'm doing today in some ways. We also had stressless days at Imperial, and I must say, GradSoc, so our graduate society, is passionate about mental health. Our PhD students, are on board. They realize they're really stressed, so they want to do something about it. And what we can do as members of staff is support them, help them, encourage them. They come up with great ideas. So they had a yoga session. They had massages. They managed to raise a bit of fund to have a masseuse coming to give them massages at the workplace. Or simply tea and coffee to talk. They had a petting zoo as well, art days. All of these things basically create a community, create a feeling of it's okay to also take time for yourself and feel better. And it really is invaluable. And of course, you cannot do much if you're not supported from the top. So you always have to go back and talk to your university. And I have to say, Imperial is really trying to tackle this problem of mental health. So here we have James Sterling, our provost, and he's a big champion of mental health and of basically promoting a healthier living at Imperial College. And this year I was very honored that I was nominated for a safety award because of my work on mental health. So it is recognized also at the university level. So you need to work on all of these aspects. So that's what we're doing. Now, what are you doing, the 40% of you who want to share? Otherwise, it's going to be a very early lunch.
University of Oxford, I think. David, let me give you this mic, because it's actually being recorded, so if you're not on the mic, it's not going to record.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That's a very interesting session. I'm David Parr from University of Oxford, Department of Earth Sciences. I think the best piece of advice that it's possible to find in Oxford is actually that the pages that point you in the directions of where assistance is needed makes the point that as professional educators, you should know that you don't have to be an expert in this, and actually it's more important to know who to pass people on to. I suppose a question that everything's raised is that at the moment we're talking about how you support people once they're inside the community, but my perception is, and I don't know if this is wrong, is that actually in the UK education system, it is so competitive getting entry to university, whether undergraduate level, master's level, PhD level, that it's extremely hard to find people who declared their needs until they're in the community and they've struggled to the point where they have to declare their needs. And I wonder whether other people have things to say about that.
No, okay. I was expecting you. Okay. I mean, I think you might be right. The problem is we don't see the numbers before they're in, right? So there's really no way for us to check whether this is true or not. I would say what's encouraging. So there's always this debate. We see over the last few years that there is a rise in the demand for mental health assistance from our undergrad students. So now the question is this because the situation has become worse and we basically have, more stressed students, more students with mental health issues, or is it because the situation has become better and we started to open up about the fact that it's okay to talk about, poor mental health, and so students are feeling encouraged to speak up? I don't know. It's very difficult. I think at the PhD level, one thing I can share with you is we had a mental health session, just general information about mental health, about what is good mental health, what you can do, how to recognize poor mental health in someone else around you. And I was really surprised by how open a lot of the PhD students were. In a room actually more crowded than this one. I think we had about 45 students in the room. Some were willing to say, yeah, when I went to counseling, this worked for me, this didn't work for me. So they were willing to put out there that, they had poor mental health, they went to counseling, and they thought that this was actually very useful or not. I was rubbish, but it's a personal thing. So I think the stigma is starting to crack, is my feeling. Maybe I'm an optimistic.
Hi. Okay. This is a personal experience for my son, who is at UCL. We have a problem that there is a terrible lack of communication between disability services. So I wonder if you have a specific disability services and how your relationship works with that centralized group,
yes,
which covers all departments.
Yes.
Because
yes.
we have a real breakdown
yes.
and lack of staff, weeks and weeks of waiting lists for psychological services. I mean, I think a whole term, or no, maybe more than 2 terms, if you're lucky, and also no in-house mental health disability person, no understanding of sharing of concerns. So when we've said this is an accident waiting to happen if you don't listen, we just get that, no, it's fine, don't worry, everything's going to be okay. Yeah. They just don't understand because they're not trained to understand.
Yeah, we do have a disability service. That disability service is involved in mental health. Again, the problem is you have to distinguish, the reality of the university is there are staff and there are students. And if you're a student, you're not going to the disability service per se, you're going to the student counseling. And it's the student services that would be your first port of call. But so the first thing, just for my own education, the first thing I did when I took on that role was to go and visit all of the players at all levels, from the provost to the director of HR to the director of student services. So I really tried to talk to everybody who was involved with students or with mental health, because maybe I should have said more that. One of the realization that we had with this role was that there was this disconnect between student and staff, and we wanted to break that. We wanted to bring everything together under one umbrella. So my impression is that there is actually quite good communication between disability services and the other branches, such as student counseling, HR, etc. My thinking is that it's probably because of all the issues surrounding, mental health and suicide rates that happen in the UK, that this came into, the top of the list of things to look into. So yes, I think Imperial, I found it, when I looked into it, a very welcoming and receiving community when you go and talk about mental health. You know, it's something that there is a need at every layers, all the way up to the president of the university. There is no fighting it. There is no trying to bury the problem under the rug. I don't know if it directly answers your question.
Well, it's just I'm just wondering if you think that you might be the best model at the moment in the London area, is there any way that you could communicate with other universities in the University of London or different universities in London in the earth sciences, or archaeology, or particularly to do with field trips and things like that? That if you could sort of invite people to have discussions and look at what we've done, do you think you could do the same thing?
Well, this is why I was so happy to accept the invitation.
We tried to get them here.
So yes, of course, that's something. I think you're right. I mean, you have to look at the different landscapes. You start with, the departments. And I can already tell you that, because I'm also talking to the faculty and the university, that different departments are very, very different in their approach to mental health. Some departments I'm not going to name them, but at Imperial have zero mental health support. It's abysmal. And also frankly, lack of willingness to tackle it because it's not a problem. Right? So realizing that it's a problem is step one. So you have to start locally. So and then of course you can and you should, and that's kind of my goal, talk to all of the players within the university and then nationally as well is absolutely a good idea. And that's kind of my hope for this group, that at least for the geosciences, it brings us together. The other thing is, are we the best model? I honestly, I don't know. I think we're doing what we can. The department is viewed by the university as leading in terms of mental health and safety and also student satisfaction. We have the best student satisfaction of Imperial College. So I think we're doing something right. Why are we doing something right? I think, again, was it Chris? Were you the one, or someone mentioned, I think it was you who mentioned, it's because we take students in the fields. And I absolutely 100% agree. I think it's because we're becoming, for a week, mama or papa, we have 30 little kids, and we have to make sure that everybody's okay, everything goes well. So we have this nurturing streak, I think, in the department where we're very responsible about our students. I think that's something that is one of our strengths that maybe you don't have if you teach 250, 300 undergraduates, in engineering or in physics that you barely know. So it's maybe a different thing. But I'm also thirsty to know what others are doing and learn from their experience. I think this should not be competitive. This should be really something we share, and we'll learn from each other what works, what doesn't work, and we adapt to our local ecosystem.
Well, archaeology at UCL, which is not the same department as my son attends, but they seem to have a slightly better handle on it with regard to field trips. So we had to go to archaeology to ask them what they do for field trips for geology, but so that was a bit of it doesn't make sense. But even 8 months down the line, nothing has changed. And it's very frustrating. Because we've warned them that things could get really bad, and nothing has changed. And it's we don't know where to go or what to do. So that's why we're here, and we're so pleased to have heard about DIG.
I think it's a long-term effort. You have to keep bringing it up, keep talking, and the mentalities have to change. So I think I probably have a bit of an easier job because the mentality is already ready for the change. But I do appreciate that if there is if you are not willing to admit that you have a problem, you're not going to solve it because you don't have a problem. So you sort of have to work with your department, and I'm very happy to come and give a talk and and do whatever is in my power. But the reality is, it's going to be a long-term effort.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, is this one working?
It is.
Thank you. Audio for Prosperity. Okay, so my name's Katie. I'm a PhD student at the University of Leeds. And I think my one criticism with this system is that you wait for students or staff to fall into the mental health hole rather than trying to sort of catch them at the edges. And I'm a little bit older than most of my PhD cohort, and I've watched some of them, and they've been at that point where you think, well, actually, there's a few self-actions that you could have taken before you've reached that hole. But of course, they don't have the experience, or they've not been taught how to do that. And I don't know if the answer is that you have something mandatory, that all first-year students at any level have to take to sort of recognise and learn. But I think in doing that, you would potentially help more students. I realise in some cases that's not going to be so, but it would be very beneficial.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct. So what we do is basically talk about mental health. And for instance, one thing I do every year, well, I've done it 1 year, okay, so it's the beginning. But the intention is to do it every year, is in October when the new PhD students come in, we have an introduction on mental health. And what does that include? That includes what's available to you, okay, but also what is good mental health, what is poor mental health, how to maintain your mental health, so this healthy, kind of like balance between work and having, a personal life as well. Also, what are the signs of someone suffering from poor mental health, and what can you do as a peer? Talk to them, inquire about them, etc. So we're trying. You're absolutely correct. We're trying to basically educate all of us about mental health and trying to avoid going, all the way to student services. Which, by the way, I mean, student services are crowded as well. I think you were asking me, the reality is, if there is an emergency, we have the power to basically call the person and say, this person needs to be seen ASAP, okay? But otherwise, you're going to wait 3-4 weeks before you see someone in counseling. And then if you're lucky, a few lucky ones will be taken for very short-term counseling, 4-6 sessions, nothing very long-term. So, and the reality is the university is not a mental health institution. It's not here to basically solve long-term mental health, but at least we can try to flag these things. So yes, your point is very well taken.
I think it might be me next. Is that working?
It is.
I'm Teresa Nicholson from Manchester Met. We have some overlaps, I think, with the system you have, but there's some differences which I thought might be worth drawing attention to. We have a centralised disability service, and there are also disability leads or coordinators in every department, and the disability service has mental health specialists. There's also a separate but linked, I can't remember the full name of it, it's something like counselling, health and well-being, or something like that, but everyone calls it the counselling service. And of course, students can get referred to the counselling service, but like we've heard, there are quite long waiting lists for students to get on like a programme of counselling. But they do have a drop-in process which allows students to go along at any time and get some kind of short-term support. But obviously that's really for students that have made that step of going, yes, I've got something wrong, I need to go and get some help. And of course there are lots of students that don't make that step or are not even aware that they have a problem.
Yes.
The people that they do come into contact with, especially undergraduate students on a very regular basis, are their personal tutors. And so their personal tutors are the people that often get sat in a room with one of their tutors, and they're offloading, telling them all sorts of stuff. And we had lots of staff coming to us and saying, we need some help, some training in how to deal with this. So we developed, it's a 2-hour training session for staff, and it starts off by focusing on a sort of a coaching approach to personal tutoring. And then it gets into, okay, how do you actually deal with difficult conversations? And we use that terminology because it's not always mental health. Sometimes it is very difficult conversations with difficult things that students have dealt with, but it's not necessarily a mental health condition. And we gave that training within our school. Then we offered it in the faculty, and it's now been taken up by our central learning and teaching centre, who are now offering it across the university. Yeah. And we're getting lots of reports of people saying it really helped, and they're using the models that we provided to help to have those sorts of conversations and know who and how to refer students on.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's
model,
excellent, yeah. Well, we also have the personal tutor. Actually, funny enough, our undergrad students tend to open up about problems more to to the senior tutor, not to the personal tutor. Again, because they're really here for the day-to-day and they're here for mitigating circumstances. We do have training as well. So we have this mental health 2-day. There's a short mental health. I think it's a 1-day training. The problem is one of resources. And I can openly share with you, I have about 30 PhD students who want to be trained as mental health first aiders. Okay? And so I basically am in communication with the university. The university wants to help. But the problem is they're oversubscribed. They have X number of trainers, and so there's a problem about. I think we're at the point where there's not enough people that are trained across the university that it becomes really easy to train people. But you're absolutely correct. It's one of these things. The more people are trained, the better it will be, because you don't know who is going to be approached. The other thing, I don't know, I'm sure it's the case with your course, but one thing that I thought was really good in the course we were given was we were reminded not to forget about our own mental health, that if you are part of a conversation that is very difficult, you will be impacted, and you should also then go and talk and have this out of your shoulders. And this is something that is common practice in psychology. Again, my partner being a psychologist, they always have a mentor. They always go and talk about their experience and how their interaction with their clients was, because you get impacted. You're human too. So it's also something to keep in mind and convey to your colleagues.
So from what sort of other stuff you've been saying, a lot of the onus you seem to be putting on the individual. Are you looking at anything in terms of the culture, in terms of the workload, in terms of sense of belonging within the department, and looking at it, so again, rather than waiting until someone actually goes, oh no, there might be something wrong, actually trying to change the entire culture so that it's just less likely to end up with something going wrong in the first place?
This is the way to go. This is absolutely what needs to happen. There's a change in culture. There are things that are happening already. So I showed, for instance, the different things that GradSoc have done, but undergraduate students, it's kind of the same thing. They want to have like a 1 day a week, for instance, where they can meet for tea and coffee, have some socials. We are trying to reduce coursework, but that has been going on for years. We've been told for many years, hey, do you really need to set that coursework? Do you really want to mark it? and do you really? Is it really necessary? So yeah, there's a change in culture. We're revising also our undergrad curriculum as well. Now, I don't want to claim that this is because of mental health we're doing this. It's to be also compatible with EU and UK regulation or practices. But yes, this is of course something that needs to be done. You're right. You need to look at what are the things that could be in your department or in your culture negative. And one of the things that came up maybe 4 years ago from a staff survey was bullying. So there's been since then a lot of, kind of essentially information of what is bullying, what is acceptable behavior, what is not acceptable behaviors, what you should do. We also have an active bystander training, for instance, which teaches you to basically intervene if you see something that is just unacceptable and not just stay there and think, oh, that's rotten, okay, let's walk away. So we are trying to change the culture at the department level, at the university level. And you're right. This is the way to do it. But at the same time, you have to have this. So it's not like one silver bullet. You try to work on everything. And we also need to change the society at large, by the way. So long-term project.
Hi, I listened to Carolyn Roberts. I no longer work. Actually, I do still work within university, I beg your pardon, but I no longer teaching, actually. I cast my mind back quite a long time now to two projects that I was involved in the early 2000s that were funded by the Funding Council and I think it was actually the Higher Education Academy when the Disability Discrimination Act came in, and we wrote. Both projects I think were led by Mick Healy, and we wrote the guidance on supporting students in the GEIS disciplines with, it was all fieldwork based subjects, and that guidance is still there. When we did the research for that, we decided that as a result of all sorts of consultations, we couldn't approach it in the same way as you are approaching it, because and the reason we decided that was because, and to take your example, mental health is one disability. Actually, there are loads of different disabilities, and there are people with multiple disabilities, many others of which are hidden as well.
Yes.
The largest one actually at the time, and it may be that mental health issues have come up the agenda, but the largest one then was dyslexia, which is also hidden. And we therefore came to the conclusion that trying to deal with these things at departmental level was going to put so much onus on non-specialist academic staff to understand these things that it really couldn't be done, so that it would have to be handled predominantly at institutional level where there were specialists to step in. Now, I don't know whether you've got any comments on that, because when I'm listening to what you're saying and what you have up there, for example, you could replace that with, communicate about deafness or whatever it might be, and we can't do all of those things separately.
Yeah.
So how do you, why have you come to that conclusion?
So, well, the first thing is I'd love to read the document you wrote all those years back, and yeah, so if you could point me to it, I think that would be very useful. Okay, so if you look, maybe I can go a few slides back. Oh, there we go. The policies, the mental health policies, are not defined by us. They are defined by the university, which itself, of course, follows, UK nationwide policies. So there's a lot of regulations and rules that you have to be careful about. So this is not what we're doing. I think what I'm advocating is for a local team to be there who actually understands the microcosm that your department is, and who is able to, make all these different parts. There's a lot actually being done on mental health, not just by one individual. The problem is it's not coordinated. So what you need a coordination. I believe, at least that's the case for my department. Maybe it's not the case for other departments, but we need a coordination between the different parts to make sure that we're still aware of what's going on at the university level, what are the rules and regulation, or the UK regulation levels, but also how best to implement them locally. We're not psychologists, we're not counselors. You're absolutely correct. I mean, my focus is quite narrow. I'm focusing on mental health. I'm not focusing on disabilities at large, because that's not my remit. That doesn't mean it's not taken care of within the department or within the university. It's just not my area of expertise, so to speak.
Sorry, can I just ask a question then?
Yes.
So do you have the same kind of committees in your department for other kinds of disabilities?
I don't know, is the truth. We do have an Athena Swan committee that tries to look at inclusion and try to make sure that the department is actually a welcoming department for different genders. So it's not specifically, they try not to say it's specifically for women equality, but they try to make sure that it's for everybody. We know at the university level, yes, definitely we have, there's this EDI forums that looks at all sorts of disability or essentially, different lifestyles or gender or ethnicity. So very, very inclusive at the university level. I don't think that we have something similar for like physical disability within the departments. But maybe wrongly so, but I think, okay, so you mentioned, for instance, the learning disabilities. So these are tackled at the undergrad level, and there's a very strong support in place for this. And if a student, suffers from dyslexia, they will have mitigating circumstances. They may have, 15 more minutes, or they may be allowed to write their exam with a computer rather than by hand. So all of this is tackled here at the undergrad level by the undergrad teaching team, not by an ad hoc panel like the one we have for this. So I think, I guess yes, I agree with you. I think there are things that we're not solving mental health, okay? I'm not saying we're solving the mental health issue in the department. What I'm saying is we're trying to make the department a better place for everybody's mental health, including my own. Okay, and by this I mean we're trying to educate people, we're trying to signpost where the help is if you need the help, but also, just like you rightly mentioned, we're trying to create a culture that is, let's say, more healthy for mental health.
Yeah, Leslie Batty from the University of Birmingham. There's a kind of couple of points that I wanted to raise. The first is that we've been talking about mental health, but that actually is an enormous sliding scale from somebody who's having a relatively short-term issue with anxiety, maybe around coursework, to somebody who's got, you know, some sort of psychosis. Yes. So how are you tackling the range of issues that are coming up? And then secondly, sorry I'm cheating, I'm having two questions. One of the issues I think is that staff are getting completely lost in this. As somebody who suffered from long-term mental health disabilities, I've had zero support from my university. I'm sure they won't thank me for saying that, but it was very poor, and hopefully it has improved. And I'm wondering what you're doing to tackle staff mental health issues.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. So, two questions. So the first one was, okay, how do we work on the scale of problem from very simple to much more complex? And this is actually where this structure comes into play, because so I'll tell you, most of the people who came to see me because of mental health issues, it was usually very mild anxiety. I'm coming to the end of my PhD. I won't manage. And you spend 2 hours with them with a coffee, and you just tell them, look, I went through this. I know it looks horrible. You talk to them. You talk them through. You give them basically the light at the end of the tunnel, and you work with them and maybe with their supervisor at finding a good way to structure their PhD, write it, and be done with it. So the small problems, you can actually tackle them locally. Okay, so if it's an undergraduate problem, it's going to be the personal tutor that's going to be involved, or it's going to be the senior tutor. If it's a master's problem, usually we have Pete Fitch will take care of it. If it's a PhD problem, we also have a team for that. So usually, I would say 90% of the mental health problem, we can actually solve them in-house because, like you said, they're basically stressors. There's something that stresses the individual, whether it's their workload or whether it's family situation, and you can actually help them by coming up themselves with a solution and moving on with them. So the ability to speak up and realize that you're not actually being told, yeah, your problem, come on, just stiffen up a bit and just deal with it, right? This is the wrong approach. The right approach is to really, it's serious, and if someone opens up and talks to you about it, it takes a lot of guts to do this. So that's how we can tackle it. If it's a bigger issue, then that's where counseling services come into play. That's where, if you're a staff, we have also a counseling service paid for by university because it's part of your benefit package that you can access, or you have NHS. So there our role is more to say, okay, I think, this is going to take long term, this is something that, you definitely need to seek help for it. Don't be afraid to do so. It's normal. Lots of people do this. And these are your options. These are your range of options. Would you like me to call them? Would you like me to come with you to this? And then the other thing is we are always clear that if you open up about mental health, we're not counselors, and this is not going to be a private conversation. If we feel that you are in danger, we will talk to the head of department because we have a duty of care. Okay, so that's the other thing. So this is the way we approach it. So we can definitely be on that scale. As far as I see it, mental health impacts everybody: staff, students, undergrad students, support staff. So I don't make a distinction between helping staff and helping student. I think a lot of the things are common. It's about, first of all, just admitting to ourselves that it's a big problem, that 25% of us have this issue. And, I talk about very personal things. I talk about, my PhD, my divorce. I talk about things that, you don't usually talk about when you're in a professional setting, but just to say, well, yeah, there are times in your life that can be very stressful, very difficult, but, you can rebound from this. It's okay. It happens. Just like you can have a broken arm, you can have a temporary poor mental health. And it's nothing to be ashamed about, but it's something you need to fix something you need to take care of, and you need to take care of yourself. And make sure that you do something for you as well. Don't forget yourself in the picture. And again, with staff, the issue is the same, but where you point staff is different. You're not going to point them to student services. You're going to point them to, in our case, this special care that we have, or to disability services. Or to their line manager or head of department, and you provide support. And you say, I'm very happy to come with you for a meeting if you want. Very happy to talk to your line manager if you want. This is the point. Now, if you're in a hostile environment and it's a department that does not view mental health as a problem, what do? Well, you have a much harder work. You have to break that stigma. You have to talk about it. You have to bring it up. You have to bring the numbers. You have to show that this is a real problem, and that this is a problem that is actually fundamental because it impacts a lot of the other things that we see. And it has connection with a lot of things. So information is really key.
Can I ask what sort of reaction you've had when you've opened up about your own issues with your colleagues, for example?
Relief. Usually it's relief. They're like, okay, oh, all right. Oh, so I'm not alone. It's not like I'm breaking, and because we all see our peers as successful, and we all think, yeah, I'm doing all right, but really I have all of these issues and those doubts, and then once you start talking about it and realizing, oh, hang on, we're actually all the same. We're not different. That breaks a big barrier, and then it's much easier to just to admit that, well, you're not superhuman. Well, yeah, duh, no. So usually it's relief and understanding and comprehension. I think you have to choose what you talk about as well, right? You have to choose your example well, or you can talk about some other students as well. Not naming them, of course, that would be very bad. But you can say, well, I've seen other PhD students, they had very similar issues. It's very common. As soon as you say, look, what you're going through is common, you're not alone, and it's true. Most of the things we see are very common, but they're just the perception of them, because we don't talk about them, is that it's unique. Oh, I'm breaking down, I'm unique. No, you're not. You have a lot of pressure right now, and if you take the weekend off, or maybe go a week on holiday and come back, you'll feel rested, and you'll see that all of a sudden, things will be a little better and a little easier. But I'll be the first one to admit that I am working in a department that, for whatever reason, and a university at this very moment is very receptive to mental health being a major problem. So that makes my life easy, because I can go talk about mental health. I can go. It's only difficult when I ask for money. That's usually when, all of a sudden, the atmosphere gets a little more chilly, because the problem is, the budget is the budget, and if you take money for this, then you take money away from something else, okay? So, but otherwise, anything that you can do or talk or is very well perceived, well received. Maybe it's because of the image of Imperial being a super competitive, not the friendliest in terms of mental health. I don't know, but certainly there is something there that makes it easy, and maybe it's not the case for some other of you in the room where, maybe it's a bit of a more difficult sell, and that's maybe where, you were mentioning doing something on the national scale. I think if you can point out to other universities where, oh, look, there are things that are being done, they're leading and we're behind, that usually helps also kind of changing the perception. Certainly, I can, very honestly between us, being behind other universities in the UK is something that is very, very motivating to the higher ups at Imperial College. So I'm sure it's no different. We are competitive. Academia is interesting. We're all very collegial and very competitive. It's this weird mix of competition and yet sharing information. So.
I'm Natasha from the University of Plymouth, but also the Royal Astronomical Society Diversity Committee for Astronomy and Geophysics, which is why I'm here today. So as someone that's got an ongoing mental health problem now as a result of really a rather catastrophic failure of this during my PhD, trying to signpost support services towards a peer, and then resulting in having a mental health problem myself, one thing I noticed that on this, it's really great to see something so sort of organised now in place when it wasn't a few years ago. But something that was missing then and still seems missing now is having students that are aware of this thing. And I mean, you've got support networks in there for every level of the department in terms of you've got an academic or an administrator who is someone that can act as the signpost for those services. But perhaps it would be useful to have students embedded within the cohorts at all levels, undergraduate, master's, PhD, because sometimes those people may not be approachable or they might be busy, or you may feel that you need to talk to someone more immediately. So, I mean, going beyond having like GradSoc, for example, because it's great that they're doing awareness-raising events, but people who are perhaps already in this system, already receiving support or who've recovered, I think would be able to give really useful insights to those that are currently suffering or struggling, that perhaps could work as an intermediary whilst you're waiting to progress through this, because as we've heard, there are different processes in place in different places. They've got different waiting times.
Yeah. No, Natasha, this is a great point. Some of it, is being done. I didn't talk about the whole ecosystem of Imperial, but you're aware of the student union, for instance. And one of their new initiatives is to have, for each year in each department, 2 or 3 elected representatives that essentially act as students for healthier living. Now, healthier living is defined very broadly. It's eating well, sexual hygiene, but also mental health. And so that's one thing. It's not on this already too crowded diagram, but I'm also in touch with the representatives and talking to them. So we have them at the undergrad level. We have a PhD student. Daisy Rood is actually embedded in our team. So we have one PhD student. We're trying to keep the team not too large, because if you go too large, then it becomes unwieldy. So we're trying to keep it, 6, 7 individual, but the idea is then to cascade down and reach as many people as possible. So the mental health first aiders, for instance, anybody can be trained. You don't have to, if you want, it's just like a fieldwork first aid course. If you want to do it, you can do it. Again, the problem is resources. So in an ideal world, you'd want to send everybody, and I have these 30 PhD students who want to be trained. I think, thanks for sharing. I think you're right. The PhD student can be a traumatic experience. It's a very difficult experience, and it's great to see the students who want to be trained and be able to help. And I'm trying my best to get the university on board. It's easy for me to spend a day to give them some general information, but again, I'm a geologist, so I can just regurgitate some of the things I know. I think it would be so much more useful if they get proper training for this kind of thing. So that's what we're trying to do. If we fail this, the next step is talk to the head of department, try to get him to put resources down for training outside of university. So that's a current conversation that goes on, and this is where I see a large part of my role actually, is to make sure to be a mover and to get university to commit resources and to change also some of their views on what they want to do. They have a target. They want to have 1 mental health first aider per 50 members of departments. And in EEC, we already way outweight that. Okay, so the problem that I have is we've been too successful. So then I come and I say, yeah, I have 30 more who wants to join in. They're like, yeah, hang on, medicine has only, 1 for 400, and we want to train them first. So it's the reality of the reality of the university is you have to change mentalities a bit on this.
Hi, Mark Anderson, also University of Plymouth. You mentioned that the mental health first aid training is available to everyone. I just wondered, what's the uptake amongst academic staff?
So it's a relatively new course. We have about 11 members of academic staff trained now, out of a total of 45. I think we're about 45 academic staff members. So it's high, actually, for the university. It's very high in ESE. We have some other, for instance, it's one of the things we want people that are in touch with the students to be trained. So if you are a deputy for Peter Allison, our graduate student director or director of graduate studies, then one of the requirements is you take that 2-day course and you are trained to deal with student issues and with issues in general. Kind of like blurring into the other topic of conversation, one thing that I was talking to our field safety director was, okay, shall we make this mandatory if you take students in the field, for instance? Because both Pete and I lead the trip in Oman. We're both trained, and I can tell you, we have students coming to us with mental health issues. We know, well, because they're master students, Pete follows them from day one all the way to the end of their year of MSc. We know that they have things that impacts them that are maybe outside of the university or that have been there long term, and then we have reactions in the field like, well, I'm being sick, or well, I have a heat stroke, and we know it's not the physical health the problem, it's the mental health the issue, and it's invaluable because we can really address the problem and especially be compassionate, because the worst thing you can do with someone who has mental health is become annoyed. Oh, come on, it's not that hot. it doesn't work. So once you're away from your support network, that's where things become a little bit more dicey. In an ideal world, I'd love everybody to be trained. That might be a hard sell, because frankly, spending 2 days for mental health training, it's a big commitment. We're all overworked. But eventually, maybe.
So we do make it compulsory for all academic staff. We're not there yet.
Yeah.
And you're right, it is a hard sell for some academic staff in particular. But as part of the personal tutoring role, we make it a requirement.
Yeah.
We're rolling that through at the moment. But also we've made it one of the core competencies for fieldwork.
Yeah.
Part of the safety for that. So
I think
to lead a field trip.
Yeah, I think that's a great model. I think that this is a great model. Just like we made it compulsory, obviously, to have fieldwork first aid, right? Nobody can lead a field course or even be as a demonstrator on the field course without having some basic knowledge of fieldwork first aid. So I think it's a great idea. Let's see in 5 years if this is, achieved.
I should say we pay for that at school budget effectively.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm Keely Mills from the British Geological Survey. So I just want to take your model and remove the students and all of the infrastructure that sits above the department. And I know that you've said training and signposting to material is key. But how do you get staff to truly engage? So we can't offer this within our organisation. We don't have, government cuts. We don't have resources necessarily available to us. So what are the key, or what are the key messages to get across to staff who might also be in an age structure where they would have slipped through the gaps when they were going through the education system as well?
Yeah. So we have monthly staff meeting, and one agenda item on the staff meeting is mental health. So every month I have an opportunity to speak to my colleagues and just bring back the topic of mental health. Obviously I don't know your organization, I don't know how you're structured, but one thing I can share is if you look at the way we are structured for the mental health, we kind of morph into what was already in place. We already had in place an undergrad administration that was completely separate from the postgrad administration. The master's was separate from the PhD administration, and everybody wanted to deal with their own mental health. They wanted to just PhD is completely different than undergrad. No, undergrad wants nothing to do with this because we're excellent at what we're doing. That's our domain. So one advice I would say is, and what worked relatively well, is to be an umbrella rather than trying to reinvent the wheel again. So to bring people around a table and talk about mental health. I think what maybe makes our life a little easier, unfortunately, is the prevalence of mental health and the importance of mental health in the media. We talked about student rates of suicide. That is definitely in the media. Some schools tend to find themselves in focus more than others, or organization, but you can bring that up. There are some, prominent roles that also talk a lot about mental health, so that also, brings it up. So there is definitely in the society today in the UK a lot being said about mental health. Okay, the problem is to transform that saying into action, into what can we actually do. And maybe one thing that is a little frustrating is you can do a lot, you can solve a lot of the superficial problems, but when it comes to, if you have someone who really needs counseling or someone who really needs, to have like long-term care, then, there's no, it's beyond the BGS or the university remit. This is going into plug it into the society, NHS and charities and what's available. And you cannot solve that problem today. But what you can do is you can inform people in your department, in your institution, of what's the best practice. A very simple advice, for instance, that I always give people who want to go to, or who need counseling is, yep, that's fine. Call this service if you're a staff, or go to student services. At the same time, go see your GP and put yourself down for an NHS, mental health counseling, because it's going to take you 6, 8, 9 weeks, maybe 3, 4 months, but eventually you'll get there. But start now, okay? So don't just do one thing, do multiple things. No, don't hesitate. And so being a little bit aware of how the system works, I think is what we can do. Budget cuts is a reality. It's just, we can do everything. But you'd be surprised, just sitting down and talking can do a lot.
Just to follow up, have you found since starting this that staff self-declaring mental health issues has increased? Because I know that, I think a lot of our staff was surprised when we ran a disability campaign that mental health sits under. There was almost this shock. Well, I've got to declare myself as disabled because I've got a mental health issue. Yeah. But I just.
It's a good
question. I
wonder
whether it's gone up.
It's a very good question. So the problem is then it becomes also delicate, because some of that information, you cannot ask, right? So, for instance, if one staff member decides to go straight to disabilities and talk to them about their issues, they don't have to go through me. And in fact, on purpose, this is we're saying, if you want to, please. If you don't, just help yourself. You don't have to go through me. So I don't know. One thing that happened at Imperial 2-3 years ago is we had a senior professor committing suicide. The reason was he was told by his head of department that he didn't meet the minimum amount of funding per year that the department expects for. And he was a very, very, I think it was in biosciences or medicine, someone very prominent in his community. So I think at least, we're aware that it's not just undergrad students who can be led to extreme because of poor mental health. So I don't think that staff would be ignorant of the fact that mental health can be an issue in my department. Would they be willing to open up? I think it will depend on their age. It will depend on maybe their gender. It will depend on themselves. I think maybe the younger generation is more willing, and maybe the older generation a bit less willing. I think it's a very personal problem. They don't necessarily if they self-declare, it would have to do with their employment contract, so that would be HR dealing with it. Right, so I don't have a full picture of the mental health state of my department. I'm not like, sitting on top and pulling all the strings. I'm here to help flag things and inform everybody from senior management, staff, and the students about what is mental health, about what you can do. But I'm not really necessarily privy to everything that goes on.
I think it's kind of important.
Yes.
So disability, having a self-declared disability, it's got to be impacting your life for a longer period of time. So, as I say, there's a massive sliding scale. And
yes.
The resources that you go to and access will vary depending on whether it's actually a disability or something more short-term.
Yes.
And that can be quite confusing for people, I think.
Yeah. This is correct. But this is where also education and just, talking about mental health is important. Because I think, I don't know if the term is correct, but you almost want to trivialize mental health by saying, if you're stressed and you're not feeling well and you're unable to cope for a week, this is actually poor mental health. It doesn't mean that, you have, and you have to be very cautious about the words that you use, So there's a lot of negative connotation surrounding mental health. but you want to basically make it clear that it is this spectrum. And of course, if you have, psychotic problems, or if you're at the other end of the spectrum, this is also poor mental health. But it can be permanent or it can be temporary. And we all experience certainly the temporary kind, maybe not the permanent one.
Right, okay, it's very nearly lunchtime, so just before we wrap up, I've taken a few notes. Now, they're on my phone for a good reason. It's because I forgot my notebook this morning. The reason I forgot my notebook, and this is relevant, is I got a phone call from my daughter's school. Now, my daughter starts her first A-level exam in about 10 minutes, so I'm a little nervous. So when I got a phone call from the school, I was panicking. And he phoned me because he was saying, Katie is hopefully going to university in September, depending how these exams go. And the teacher was saying, we have a form here that we can fill in and send to the university, telling the university about the mental health issues that she's been having. Can you talk to Katie, because she's 18, so we need her permission to send this on to the university. And I was like, I work at a university. This teacher knows that. I said, I've never heard of this. I never knew schools could tell us. Did anybody know that schools send information on? We got a nod there. Yeah, they could send information on. I've got a few people nodding. It was news to me. But I just thought that was interesting, because I think a lot of our no, that's completely the wrong way of putting it. Disclosure, and that's, my phone's gone off now. Bear with us a second. Right. So I was just making some notes, and disclosure was one of the big ones, that if we know people, not just students, have a problem, then we can help. I say this to so many of my students. If I know, I can help. So what I'm sort of looking at, we're not trained counsellors. We've said that again and again. We all know that. So what can we do? So it's sort of looking for solutions. And I quite like what Katie said about catching people before it becomes a crisis. Perhaps that's something we can be looking at generally. I've thought personally of posters, just having posters, just advertising what is available, and to talk to people. Training, that was one that Alice and I thought of straight away. Is that at institutional level? Is it at national level? A little bit, I think it depends on the training. I was very interested to hear you had a 2-day training course. I'm trying to get things like that set up within our faculty, and it seems within the university. I'm seeing the head of student support next week, and I'm taking this with me. And one of the great things I can say, and when I've said to people, is, well, Imperial are doing this. And they're going, Imperial? Yes. Now, I was an undergraduate and postgraduate at Imperial, so I'm kind of, yeah. But it's a good stick. So training, that's an issue perhaps we can look at and share. And it was interesting when you said about local level as well as national level. So the other one I picked up on was there's lots of information out there. I think you were talking about a document that had been written quite a few years ago, and you were saying that, you hadn't seen it. I think perhaps DIG could be a repository. If people can send us their information and we can put it on the website. We do have a website. It's not very well advertised because we haven't got very far with it. It's a page within the IAGD website, and I think Chris would be more than happy if we were putting resources up there. So that's perhaps something we can do, because if there's one location that you can go to, I think that would be helpful. I don't know what people think about that, but perhaps we can talk about it. But again, that's something about communication. The last one I thought perhaps a bit cheeky, but perhaps I don't know whether we could do it or not, is actually comparing our disability services, both sort of within our departmental faculty level and university level, as a means of, good practice, but also look what other people are doing. And always for student level anyway, we can perhaps use NSS, TEF and such like to act as a carrot for increased interest in all disabilities. This isn't obviously just mental health, but mental health does play into many of the other aspects of diversity too. So I think we'll wrap up there because we're now 5 minutes late for lunch. But I'd just like to thank Cedric for a great talk, a great session this morning.
Thanks for having me again.
I'm kind of conscious that we didn't even get onto the fieldwork part, Cedric. But as I expected, what this has done is just kind of open up a whole kind of I don't want to say can of worms, but it's clearly something that there's a lot of discussion to be had around. And I think over the course of the day, the fieldwork side is going to come out. And maybe when we have the plenary later on and talk about where Dig UK can go, that is something that we can certainly think about. So thank you.
So I don't need a mic because this is for us here. But as you go back out into the library, you'll see one of those poster boards up that says "Park your ideas here." And so if you take one of the small sticky notes, put ideas on that, and just put it on that paper, whatever ideas, thoughts, questions you may have, it'll help us continue to build this network.
Right. So lunch is already laid out. It's ready and waiting for us. So through the double doors, and then, yeah, we'll kick off again at, I think, 1:30 it says on the schedule. Yeah, brilliant. The slide that says it's okay not to be okay, put it on my office door.
Okay, yeah.
Because that's what I'm not okay a lot of the time.
Can we pull that on that camera? Try to take a picture of it.
Yeah, sure. But you can also find, so most of that information is not mine. It's
yeah, I tried to memorize the.
But you have the
this has been, this has been recorded
so you,
anyway.
So you can access it straight from CME.
I love that because that's the message that we need to get across. It really is.
Exactly. And people tend to not take that on board. So I think that's the main thing.
The biggest issue, and I didn't want to say this because it could have gone in a whole other direction for another hour. But the problem with disclosure